Hey guys, welcome to our panel for Demo Week called International Entrepreneurship from the Australian Point of View. I have with me Noor, Nyree, and Joanne. If y'all want to introduce yourselves, that'd be great, and your company. Noor, why don't we start with you?
Thanks, Laura. Thanks for having me. So I'm Noor Magesh, CEO and co-founder of Archimigo. It's a cybersecurity startup. So we extend the security capability to all businesses so they all can design security controls when they design their applications and maintain them securely. And it's a B2B SaaS company. So we've been in the business since February 2019.
Nice. All right, Nyree.
Hello, Nyree McKenzie, CEO and co-founder of BidHive. So BidHive is a platform that's bringing transparency to the contract bidding process, which is one of the least digitized and most corrupt industries in the world. So with lots of contracts now being awarded around COVID, we want to open up the competition and make it far more accountable.
Okay, and Joanne?
Yes, so I'm Joanne Howarth. I'm the CEO and founder of Planet Protector Packaging. We manufacture sustainable thermal packaging made out of sheep's wool. Our product is an alternative to polystyrene, and we're on a mission to eliminate polystyrene and to become the market leader in sustainable thermal packaging that doesn't harm the planet. So we've been in business since 2016. And we're just beginning our rapid growth phase.
Awesome. So as we can tell, there's quite a few industries coming out of Australia. That's awesome. So I've got a few questions for you guys. A lot of these questions apply to all of our global companies, but I just think it'd be very interesting to get Australia's perspective. So the first question I have is, with Australian venture capital growing so rapidly, it's up to about $1.4 billion as of 2018. Which is up from 600 million in 2016. What impacts has that had on the community as a whole, the startup community, and specifically on your company and industry? Whoever wants to start can go ahead.
I'll start.
Okay, you start, Noor. Yeah.
Thank you, Joanne. So definitely we see a lot of growth in, and also there is a lot of different players coming into the market in the venture capital in Australia. Especially in my area where cybersecurity is, there is a lot more startups coming in. There was only one accelerator that we could participate in previously, but now there are more options available. So that means they all, encourage new founders and especially tech founders to be, upfront and they're happy to support even pre-revenue nowadays. Been talking about COVID in the last year, the venture capital has slowed a little bit in the start of the year, but as we can move towards the end of the year, it started picking up really, really fast. So we rarely see any impact to the startups, at least in my area in cybersecurity.
Awesome. Joanne, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say the increased investments and the capital that's available in Australia has really accelerated the development of novel and really innovative ideas that I see are tackling some of the world's biggest problems. So I'm obviously working in that space and looking at the preservation of the planet and the oceans. And there's a lot of investors, an increasing number of investors, I believe, that are looking to invest in companies with a social purpose. Like we exist. Social impact is at the core of what we do. And there's a lot of investors really interested in entering into that space as a way of achieving their own sustainability goals. I think in particular we've seen a focus on areas like a focus on that social impact space. That's the space that I particularly know. But there's a lot of young entrepreneurs in the space, and people are doing really good things. And I think that this is a time that people recognise, particularly with COVID as the trigger, that you can put purpose, profit, and everything all together and have a very viable business.
That's great. And Nyree?
Yeah, I think we've made a really remarkable leap. Just in the last 10 years, the startup sector's gone from being pretty inconspicuous to being one of the fastest growing in the world. And we have about 40 companies an hour starting up here in Australia. So yeah, we're rocking. And but to put into perspective, in 2013, there were only 4 active accelerators, but we've now got over 300 startup hubs and entrepreneur research programs, and around 500 industry and tech communities. So, and of course, out of that, we're now starting to get our success stories to match them.
Yeah.
And I also think a lot of this has got to do with the government waking up to the need that they need to facilitate and support innovation in Australia. Because for me personally, until I knew of the startup ecosystem, or that it was an enabler, I didn't know how to pivot from being a consultant to being a tech founder. And, you know, I actually made the leap after completing a week-long entrepreneurship program. Then I quit my business, joined an accelerator, found my product team. And it sounds so textbook, and I suppose it is, but, you know, our ecosystem's really trying to give people a structured pathway to building and commercializing their startups. And I think that's fantastic. And I think it's probably quite unique.
Yeah, I will just say anecdotally, I have been in the startup space since 2014. I was the first employee at a fintech, and we ended up selling to Jefferies Bank. And then I wanted to come on the venture side and really help out because I just love the space. And in the past, how many years is that? 6 years now. The Australian founders that I've met has increased like noticeably. Like I used to go places and never see an Australian, and then like 2 years ago I worked with one out of Dallas. So it's noticeable, and I think that that was a really great investment on the part of the government. Especially, I wonder, Joanne, if you have had any government incentive programs for your sustainability project or anything that's been helpful for you.
Yes, Laura, there's a multitude of government initiatives and grants. I've been very lucky and fortunate to receive 2 grants, one of which was to enable me to do the work to get investment ready. And the second is to establish an operation in Tasmania, because Tasmania is like the food headquarters in Australia. It has all the beautiful berries and cherries and, you know, seafood and such a lot of product that's exported under the brand Tasmania name. And for me to supply into Tasmania is cost prohibitive. So I've found that a lot working in this space is that there's a lot more available for female founders. So I recently received a female founders grant to help accelerate our growth. And it's like the other girls say, definitely Australia is on the move. Yeah.
Awesome. Definitely. So, for example, there are, the mentors and the VCs, they are very, very friendly in Australia. So they literally want to see you succeed. So that's one of the things that boosts up the ecosystem mainly, because all the players have significant amount of contribution they actually do that to improve the industry and the ecosystem. We also have like federal level, state level, and even council level funding. And during COVID, there's numerous grants available. So I think what Joanne said is there are grants available for female founders. There are VCs available just to fund female founders. Yes. And government actually encouraged that to, even helping the VCs to fund female founders. So there is a lot more help available now compared to 5 years ago.
That's great. Yeah. And Nyree, have you seen any programs?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, at every level. So I've personally received 3 rounds of state government funding, a local government grant, and the federal government R&D tax incentive and export incentive. So they're fantastic. And I think one of the real incentives which would be of interest to investors is the Australian government R&D tax incentive. So that gives you around 40% of your R&D activity back as a refund or as a tax offset. And we also have the export marketing development grant, which reimburses 50% of promotional expenses, including, if you have an international rep, you can get up to 150,000. So that is very attractive for, investors or even companies basing themselves here in Australia, because it certainly extends the runway.
That's great. That's amazing that they do all of that.
It's very interesting, if I can just say, based on the Canadian and UK model, the federal government is just about to launch the Australian Business Growth Fund, which is a really interesting initiative for grants between $5 million and $20 million to support growing businesses. And it's an incredible system where the government actually advances you the money so that you don't need to sell out too early.
Yeah.
And down the track, once you're in a stronger position, the government will take the money back, and you still retain 100% equity in your company.
Oh, that's
so
amazing.
it's going to be a very interesting, watching how that works.
Yeah, so it's a great time to start a company in Australia, it sounds like. That's interesting, because I did read that most investment in Australia is seed and Series A, or later even. So I think that's great to not, hurt the little guys. Because once you make it past like pre-seed and seed, it gets easier. What I've seen. Okay, so that's kind of all the stuff that's like, helped you guys get where you are, and all the great investments. So I'd love to hear about your challenges, just what you faced in the past year, or challenges specific to your industry, challenges with fundraising internationally, whatever you've faced, and kind of how you've overcome it.
Yeah.
I think many startups in Australia, or entrepreneurs, are really challenged when they get to that valley of death, that leap between the pre-seed or the accelerator and the seed raise. And in Australia, we don't have a lot of pre-revenue investment available to us, other than those time-limited accelerator programs. And so they'll provide capital for working capital of about $20,000 to $70,000. It doesn't get you very far. It certainly doesn't get you to commercialisation. So I think the government's really recognised that gap to help us with that challenge, to get us to the next milestone. And I also think in Australia, we're not at that age in the startup ecosystem where we have had former founders now coming into the VC circle. But I think we're starting to see some now. We've got Scott Farquhar from Atlassian actively investing through Skip Ventures. But yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head. It's really that gap between pre-seed and seed.
Mm-hmm.
So the other government organization that helps startups to go outside Australia and promote the business is Austrade. So they help you. There is a landing pad in San Francisco, Singapore, and Tel Aviv. And I think there's 6 other cities in the world. So where you wanted to go. So they specialize in different areas like clean tech, cyber, and all of it. So they help you with, workshops, connect you with other peers in that market. And also there are grants available, like Nyree mentioned before. So you can kickstart your journey to other markets using those help available. The challenge is definitely raising fund before before you have revenue. So it's kind of catch-22. So me being in enterprise SaaS market, the enterprise will be asking, do you have funding behind you? Who's behind, who's supporting your startup? But when we go fundraising, they'll be asking, who's your first customer?
Yep.
So it's kind of catch-22. So for me, getting the first customer, it's a very, very slow process. I'm lucky enough to self-fund myself up until that stage. So I don't have to let go of a lot of equity, and I can survive on that, grants and funds available. But it's not the case for everyone. But there are a lot more accelerator programs when you're in the very early stage. So as long as you have a really good product and it's not in a crowded market, some venture capital is there ready to fund.
Mm-hmm.
My personal biggest challenge is not certainly funding is an issue and a big issue, but for me, one of the biggest challenges has been around the manufacturing of our product. So Australians have always had a great affinity with the wool industry. Like Australia got wealthy off the back of the wool on the sheep's back. And in the 70s and 80s, a lot of the wool scouring and processing went offshore to China. So when I established the business, my vision was to manufacture our product out of Australian wool and to manufacture here locally. But because of the constraints and the lack of manufacturing within the country, the only way I could get the business supply chain set up was through establishing partnerships with mills in China. And I've moved away from that. And just recently, we've established a relationship with some people in New Zealand. But part of the big agenda for us this year is to capitalise on the manufacturing grants that are available and to bring it back home on Australian turf. I think it creates jobs. It's good for rural communities. It's good for so many. And the government is now realising that. So I'm spearheading a campaign to bring wool processing back on board. And, so that's an exciting thing for us because it'll be a game changer. It will enable us to vertically integrate and own our supply chain. And as well as that, it'll enable us to control our margins and our quality assurance and, just the image of a product that's Australian made. I think that's going to be very strong and it's going to be a game changer for us.
I would love to see your product because I haven't seen it yet, but if it's made out of wool and it's a package?
Yeah, so it's wool liners. So as opposed to using a polystyrene box, it's a cardboard carton, which in itself is recyclable. And then it's two interlocking liners. So one goes across the bottom of the box, up the top and over the top. The other one goes around the side. So all the internal walls of the box are insulated, and wool by its very nature, like our technology, borrows from nature. So what we're doing is leveraging the thermal properties of wool. Just as it keeps the sheep warm in winter, so too it keeps them cool in summer. And it's nature's smart fibre. So and wool is obviously biodegradable. So as opposed to polystyrene, which hangs around the planet for 500 years and doesn't break down, our wool will go into the ground and totally break down within 6 months.
That's awesome. Well, I have some more questions about challenges. I don't know how much y'all want to talk about challenges, but I have a question just as an American. I don't really understand kind of the challenges faced by people in Perth as opposed to Sydney. I was wondering if that's becoming easier for people as everyone moves to Zoom and, we just kind of accept that we're just going to be inside for a while. Has it become easier to find investment that way? Or do you still need to be present in the big tech centers?
I think it's still the visibility is a major factor. So Sydney, Melbourne, East Coast, and then West Coast. It's like that. The visibility, the more visible you are, the number of people that you speak to. But again, it comes back to the basics. You have a good business, you have customers, you have revenue, and you're growing. That's all they care. So visibility is still an issue, but COVID has broken the barriers. But I still see a little bit of, because I'm in Melbourne and I see a lot of Sydney investors say, you can meet for coffee every now and then. And we spend majority of the time in lockdown compared to Sydney. So I'm a little jealous, I should say. Yeah.
We have, everyone here knows about San Francisco and Silicon Valley. And right now there's kind of like a mass exodus from those places. So I think for us at least, being in San Francisco is still kind of important, but not nearly as much or as important as it was 10 years ago. Where are you located, Nyree and Joanne?
I'm located in Brisbane, which is only 12 hours flight from San Francisco. But yeah, everything's Zoom now.
It's interesting because I'm in Sydney, and Sydney is the hub of where I guess everything's happening. Yeah. And over the last couple of weeks, a lot of venture capitalists and people that are wanting to talk prefer to meet up personally rather than via Zoom. So that's been my personal experience. I've got a meeting this afternoon that's in the city. There's still the people that connect via Zoom, but I think those initial meetings, the energy, the passion, you get so much more out of a conversation that's face-to-face than via Zoom, unfortunately.
Yeah. So this kind of brings me to my next question about COVID. So, because you're saying that you're going to have an in-person meeting, and I'm so jealous because I'm like, they're allowed outside. Like, that's amazing. So I kind of want to hear about y'all's experience with your company through COVID, and then kind of how, looking for fundraising outside of Australia has been impacted by COVID, especially in a country like the US where we can't go outside right now. Not doing great with it. So like you wouldn't be able to come over here for a meeting. So kind of what's been your experience with COVID so far? The sun is coming.
I think the first, I was in a accelerator when the COVID started, like in February, I started with Cyrise, one of the cybersecurity accelerator in Melbourne. Okay. So we did the 1 month program, and then we were in Sydney just before the lockdown started. So we had to cancel a lot of plans. We had to go virtual. We were the first cohort to go virtual accelerator. We actually had planned to come to US for 2 weeks, spend West Coast, East Coast a week, but that got cancelled indefinitely. So we kind of come to the reality that we're going to be inside for majority of the year. So we decided to do everything virtual. So it gives us a lot more time and energy to concentrate on other markets, because now we're not restricted to Australia because everyone is connecting on Zoom, which was good for my industry because cybersecurity was booming during later part of the COVID because everyone was working from home, a lot more ransomware and other things that's happening. So that the need has increased. So it's a good thing for me. The only thing is I had a remote team. They missed working with each other in the same place. Some of them were struggling with, working alone for a long period of time. So I had to give them, time off to see, do nothing, I guess. So those sort of actual challenges dealing with the crisis that was there. Now Melbourne was not so lucky because we had the big second wave. So we were in lockdown until November. But we all did what we had to do. So the sooner we get out of lockdown, and then we can start moving on with our life. So we spend most of our winter inside, and I think Sydney is they've been lucky. So which is why Joanne is happy to go and meet people.
I have to say it's the first time I've ventured out for a long time. So we're still very cautious in Sydney, and everywhere you go, people are still wearing masks and everything. We don't want to be the next Melbourne.
Yeah.
Yes.
I heard though about that lockdown. I mean, it seems to have worked. So good for you guys. I'm very jealous.
Lockdown.
Sorry?
We just came out of a 3-day lockdown. We had one case, and the whole city just said, "Right, you're staying home." Anyway,
Australia, come help us.
Yeah.
But it is interesting. I think that this the lockdown kind of gave people a long time to think really hard kind of about the future of the earth. We should do sustainable things, and we need we can do things online, do analytics online, and we need cybersecurity. I know you saw that the US government was hacked. I think at the beginning, as you guys were saying, the funding started to slow down because people weren't really sure what was going to happen. And then towards the end of the year, everyone started, investing again and kind of had a better handle on the situation. So that's good to hear that everyone's done all right through COVID, because I get nervous when hearing about those things. Let me see, what else did I have to ask? So I did read that 45% of venture funding in Australia goes to fintechs, and coming from a fintech, that makes me kind of proud. I'm like, yay, go fintechs. But I just wanted to know kind of if there's favorites in Australia, if there's trendy industries, if you think those are well-deserved, or because I also saw that software and biotech are people's preferred investments. Do you find yourself fighting against those guys, or are your industries doing all right, if that makes sense.
I'll jump in. I think definitely I agree with the fintech because our East Coast is where all our banking is concentrated in Sydney, Melbourne, and they're Australia's largest cities. And we do have a massive concentration of fintechs in Australia. And the West Coast, Perth, is generally where the mining and resources is clustered. Mm-hmm. So I'm not surprised that there's so much investment in fintech, although I was surprised at the statistic because we do have such a diversity of startups here. Mm-hmm. So that is very surprising. But I think the rate of fintech, and I researched it after you told me that statistic, was it's actually quadrupled in just 4 years. So it is a hugely disruptive on a global scale. So yeah, fintech's impacting everybody.
That's why I saw so many Australians, because I was in fintech and it was like every year there'd be like a lot more Australians, but now it makes sense. So
I think we had a massive banking inquiry last year. It was the Royal Commission into Banking Misconduct. And I think out of that it's really stimulated interest again from the regulators and the governments. So that now the regulators are very open to technology around digital wallets, and there's huge interest in blockchain technology as well. And we're now moving beyond proof of concept to actual use cases now. And so we have a chief entrepreneur in Queensland, another example of government championing entrepreneurship, and the outgoing chief entrepreneur is the CEO of Everledger, which is a blockchain, and so I think that's a great example of it in practice.
So what I see as fintech being popular is when you look at the fintechs that actually grown exponentially, they're all brought in a disruptive idea to create a new market. For example, Airwallex, they specialize in international payments. They grow exponentially. Same thing now with Afterpay, and then there is installment payments for shopping. So I think they have grown tremendously during COVID time. Even you can buy groceries in installments now. So not just because of their fintech, and I worked one of the big four before being a founder, and the bank that I worked for did the blockchain first government contract with Queensland government. So I remember what you're saying. It is actually initially, like I've been living in Australia for 20 years. There's not a lot of options for customers. There is big four, and then there is tier 2 banks. So that's why people see the gap in the market, and they created that. And initially, here in Australia, people are conservative, and trust is a very big part in being a customer to a new company. So they slowly build the trust. It didn't happen overnight, but Sydney is a fintech hub, and they have a lot of fintechs there. And also now it's actually starting to cascade other cities like Melbourne, Brisbane, everywhere else. Blockchain was not as popular as others. Definitely, it's because of the disruptive nature of the technology they brought in, and people saw the value in it. And to a degree, they were starting to get a little bit dissatisfied with the service they received from their banking institution. So that's why it's been successful. And the VCs actually recognize that as well to say, this is the market we should invest in. And they actually done that. So that's probably why. But now I see a lot more investment in sustainability, cybersecurity, and also, bringing more skills into Australia. Like Joanne said, there's a lot more grants available to bring manufacturing back from China and other countries. So there's a lot more investment there.
Yeah. And also I think with the fintech, it's spinning out into the reg tech, the compliance and the risk, and the government now heavily investing in building an industry base here for that as well.
Yeah, I concur with all of those comments. Wherever I go, fintech dominates. But having said that, our solution is very disruptive. So in whatever accelerators I've participated, whatever programs, there's always a dominance of fintech. And I'm invariably the only person that's actually manufacturing a physical product.
Yeah.
So even just recently, I was very humbled to win the Cartier Women's Initiative. And I was one of 20 that went through the Cartier program over 12 months. And out of the 20, I was the only one that was manufacturing. So we had to create a different model for me to work with. But having said that, there is a big focus in Australia, increasingly with the Australian and New Zealand New Plastics Pact and all the initiatives around removing plastics from supply chains, you know, looking at their devastating impact on the oceans. And anything with sustainability and the circular economy is of great interest to investors.
Yeah. I think just any industry, as long as you can be disruptive and like forward moving, you'll get the investments eventually. Does sound like fintech started a while ago and then is really gaining steam right now. So that's good to hear. So kind of just to wrap this up, I would love for you guys to just tell me where your company is headed, what challenges you see coming and like what you're going to do to get over those. And yeah, just brag about yourselves a little bit. And I know you don't want to brag about. You want to start, Nyree?
Yeah, sure. Well, I think the future is really bright for the industry that I'm in, which is procurement and bidding, because it's evolving now so fast after 25 years of total stagnation, and the bar is low because there has been no innovation in procurement. No one knows, no one can see who's won the contract, how that decision was made, how much apart from what you see published in a newspaper, you don't know how many variations they've had. They come in and bid for 10 million, and next thing they know, it's a $60 million, $100 million project. So it's been a very dirty industry, and it's got to be cleaned up. And I think the great thing about pandemics, I saw a great term. Is it a snake or is it a ladder? For us, it's a ladder. You can look in hindsight and take so many lessons learned of what went wrong. Yeah. And we're only competing with clunky legacy systems now. But what we're now seeing with COVID is, global supply chains need to change. Transparency needs to change. And we need to open up the industry or at the economy to small and medium enterprises and minority businesses to compete, to get our economies back on their feet. And they have no solutions behind them. So I think, supply shortages have been part of the reason for the momentum in the industry, and there's a movement to open contract data. And that excites me because, like the banking industry, we'll be starting to see a flow of information right across the economy to increase transparency and competition. So I think we'll see a new ecosystem emerge insofar as procurement and how it joins up.
That's great. I'm glad that there's a silver lining in COVID for you. Some people are looking hard for theirs, so that's great. Noor, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, definitely. I agree with what Nyree said. We have a lot more use cases to brag about now. We had to make it, the need has increased. Like I said before, we started working with our first enterprise customer in Melbourne through COVID and through Christmas break. So that's how the need has been amplified. We are looking to start a lot more proof of concept with enterprises in Melbourne and Sydney. So it's onwards and upwards for us this year.
That's great.
And for me as well, it's very optimistic future. We've got our immediate move into Tasmania, our move into Southeast Asia by the end of this year. Just 2 days ago, we won the World Packaging Awards for our innovation.
Oh, congratulations.
Very exciting. That gives us a platform to expand globally. And I think with all the R&D that we're doing and the momentum that's building around plastics and COVID, which has been a trigger for people to really reset and rethink the way they're doing and looking at their supply chain and right across the board, I see that the future is very bright and I'm very excited.
I'm so excited to watch all of y'all grow, and I can't wait to help you find investors. And I hope everyone enjoyed this panel and enjoys the rest of Demo Week.